that will help with kind of the background noise. Awesome. So we are recording and going. Before we start, quick fun fact, this is actually a picture of downtown Seattle that was taken 2 years ago by the Seattle Times. So as you can see, wildfire smoke is definitely something that is current and ongoing, and definitely a major issue for homeowners and builders and architects to think about when designing healthy homes. So I'm really excited for our guest speakers today to get into the weeds of this topic. I have a couple announcements prior to getting started. If my cursor will work. Well, welcome. As a reminder, this event is being recorded. Recordings of this event will be made available 1 week after today. Please mute your microphone during the presentations. There will be a time after each presentation for a question and answer session for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then we usually host a long kind of question, answer, and discussion session after all the presentations at the end. We have 2 speakers today. If you have any clarifying questions, please feel free to post the chat in your question in the chat box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. There's a little chat bubble called chat. And so if you do have a clarifying question, I can keep track of those and ask them for our speakers. If you have any specific logistical questions, I'll be posting my contact information in the chat as well. My email is there, and you can also text me. I'll have my phone handy this evening if you have any logistical or technical issues. A couple of fun upcoming Guild events to keep your eye out for and mark your calendar. On June 27th, we have a fantastic presentation by Sound Foundation Northwest. They are doing a tour and small presentation of their Hope warehouse, where they are building tiny homes for homeless. So please join us for that awesome event. It will be in person. Masks are strongly recommended, although not required. August 18th, we'll be hosting our virtual multifamily housing symposium event. Should be fantastic. We host this annually. And this year's topics are materials, decarbonization, and affordable housing. We have a really great swath of great speakers from King County, as well as building science, and several from the Housing Development Consortium, which we're really excited to be hosting. August 24th, we'll be hosting a Northwest Eco Building Guild picnic at Ravenna Park. Please feel free to join us. That event is free and open to everyone. We have reserved about 3 picnic tables for some fun, lively conversation. Please feel free to bring pre-packaged food to share with folks. And then September 28th is our next education event, all about building with non-toxic materials. So fun stuff coming out of the summer here and into early fall. Should be great. I'd like to remind everyone to consider becoming a member today. There are fantastic benefits that come with being a Northwest Eco Building Guild member, including replays of past events, discounted pricing on all events. We have a code innovations database, as well as your company can be featured on our Green Pages listing. It's a directory of which I send out to my clients on a daily basis. It's a fantastic kind of an informative directory, really great for potential clients and networking, as well as networking opportunities through our guild. So please consider becoming a member. And with that, I'd like to provide a quick thank you to our sponsors for tonight. Our first sponsor is Pathway Design and Construction. They are a Seattle-based full-service remodeling company that specializes in highly aesthetic, eco-friendly, and custom designs. By focusing on comfort solutions to accommodate homeowners' individuality, the Pathway team is able to create beautiful and functional designs that are built to last. Paul Kochaharhook, owner of Pathway, understands the repercussions of using chemical-based materials in construction and its effect on our health and the built environment. Many homeowners are unaware of the harmful effects certain building materials can have on a home's occupants. This is why Pathway has strong values around this topic, and it is in their mission to promote wellness into each remodeled project. It is their standard to consciously select clean, eco-friendly materials for each project, while having protocols in place to leave each remodel healthier and more energy efficient. Pathway takes pride in serving the discerning homeowners of Seattle on the East Side. They've also been a long Guild partner and sponsor, and they've created beautiful remodels that are healthy, eco-friendly, and accessible to all, regardless of age, ability, or stage of life. The demand for Pathway's care and craftsmanship has been extraordinary for the past few years, doubling them in size, and their growth has created opportunities in expanding a collaborative team. Also, if you're interested in joining the Pathway team, you can contact them directly. They are hiring several positions. So thanks again, Pathway, for your sponsorship this evening. Our next sponsor is Mighty Energy Solutions. And I'm going to go ahead and actually bring up a small video that was provided by Mighty Energy. Gio, can I just get a thumbs up if you can see that? Great. All right. I think. Awesome. All right. I'll go ahead and play and make sure the volume's up high. Volume on my end is up high as well. All right. And I hope you all can hear this.
As our electricity gets cleaner, so do all our electrical appliances automatically. And no one likes to be cold. Most kinds of electric heat are inefficient, uneven, loud, and unhealthy. Mighty Energy Solutions offers clean, silent, efficient, and affordable infrared radiant heating alternatives. Mighty Energy Solutions, the Northwest's premier provider of infrared radiant heating solutions to help meet your sustainability goals. Contact us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mighty Energy Solutions, for sponsoring tonight's event. I'm glad that video worked out. And lastly, I'd love to give a huge thank you to King County Green Tools. They have been a long partner and sponsor of the Northwest Eco Building Guild's education events and programs. They didn't leave me any message today, but I did want to throw up their website, which I'll post in the chat. I welcome you all to check out King County Green Building Tools for all of their resources for builders and homeowners. They have fantastic case studies, technical resources, as well as white papers on specific products or strategies used in green building. They have fantastic construction and demolition recycling information regarding the haul rates of each of their construction and demolition facilities. And they have this awesome eco remodel tool, which you can click on. Oh, well, I think there is a link in there that you can click on, and it's a fantastic way to kind of see what remodeling programs you can implement in your home that are cost effective. So I welcome you to check out this. Most of the links are working in there, and I welcome you to check out King County Green Tools website, and I will post that in the chat. Thank you so much, King County, for your sponsorship tonight. And lastly, that brings me to tonight's speakers. We are so excited to have both Orly Stamfer, PhD candidate in environmental and occupational hygiene at the University of Washington, and Albert Brooks with Small Planet Supply with us this evening. Thank you both so much for your involvement with tonight's event. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing and pass it over to our first speaker, Orly Stamfer. Welcome, Orly. Thank you so much for your involvement tonight. I have made you a co-host, so I'm hoping that has provided you screen sharing opportunities.
Okay, let me try it.
Awesome, that looks good. Thank you.
Let me see if I can, oh. I made the mistake of trying to go into presenter mode.
No worries. It's a little off center. I wonder if you can kind of zoom it down and try presenting the present mode one more time, maybe.
You know, I might just, because my monitor just like went black when that happened. I might just make the slides bigger and the sidebar smaller, and
That works too. No
tell
problem.
me if this is okay. Okay, is that good?
Oh yeah, that's great. Awesome. Thank you, Orly.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to talk with you about wildfire smoke. So like Nina mentioned, I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences at University of Washington. And a lot of my work has been supported by the Northwest Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit. So I wanted to give a special shout out to them. My work is all focused on air pollution, different aspects of air pollution, and a lot of it is focused on using low-cost air quality sensors, air pollution sensors, and also focused on wildfire smoke. Okay, because a lot of my work is supported by the Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit, I just have to put this disclaimer in my presentation, so I'm just going to leave this up for a moment. Okay, and this is just a quick outline of some of the things I'll be talking about today. So I'm going to start with a little background on wildfire smoke and health, and then I'll talk about wildfire smoke monitoring. So where, some recommendations for where to go to actually look up wildfire smoke information. And then I'll talk a little bit about low-cost sensors, and I'll explain what those are. And then at the end, I'll go into a couple of strategies for how to reduce exposure to wildfire smoke. And yeah, feel free to ask questions, clarifying questions throughout. And if I don't see a question, please feel free to just interrupt me too. That's fine. Okay, so just start with this really broad overview of what is wildfire smoke. A lot of times we talk about it as if it's just this like one thing, and as if wildfire smoke is all kind of the same. And it's actually really dynamic. So wildfire smoke is made up of particles, which themselves are liquids, includes liquids and solids, and then also gases. And it can change a lot as it travels over space, as the temperature changes and just the wind changes, and so as it's traveling over space, the composition of the wildfire smoke changes a lot. So here's just two examples. This picture, these are both from the Washington Smoke blog, and they're both from September 2020. And the picture on the left is showing the huge smoke plume that I'm sure you all remember, that a lot of it came from wildfires in Oregon, and then the smoke kind of settled off the coast and then came up and blanketed basically the whole state of Washington. And so you can see it's like really thick smoke. And then on the right, we have a really different kind of fire that's just showing more local smoke from fires near Yakima, and just showing, that smoke plume in a more local area. And so those two, kinds of wildfire smoke are going to be kind of different from each other. So just to give you a sense that wildfire smoke is really dynamic and changes a lot. And that's part of what makes monitoring wildfire smoke challenging. So why do we care about exposure to wildfire smoke? There are a few different health issues that have been associated with wildfire smoke, and it can cause new issues, and it can also exacerbate existing health issues. So some of those are asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, other respiratory issues, heart issues, and then also eye irritation. And I didn't put on here, but also headaches is a big one. So when we're thinking about wildfire smoke, and like in the previous slide, I said wildfire smoke is associated with different health issues. What's the component that we're actually thinking about in wildfire smoke? Because like I said, it's made up of so many different things. So usually, not always, but usually what we're thinking about is this fine particulate matter, PM2.5. So PM stands for particulate matter, which is made up of a lot of different solid and liquid particles, and it comes from any kind of burning, traffic exhaust, agricultural burning, and also just like, you know, when wind kicks up a lot of dust, that can also contribute to particulate matter. There are a lot of different sources of it, and I'll talk more about that later. And then the 2.5 here refers to the size of that particulate matter. So on the right, this is just to give you a sense of the scale that we're talking about. And this is from the EPA. So, you know, human hair is maybe 50 to 70 microns in diameter. And then there's these PM10, so that's the same thing, particulate matter 10, just different number to refer to a slightly larger size of 10 microns in diameter. And then there's these PM 2.5, that's the ones that we're talking about that are really small. So you can see how small they are compared to the PM10 and compared to just the diameter of a human hair. So these are really small particles. And they're so small, in fact, that when you breathe them in, they can go all the way into your bloodstream and impact your, you know, your blood vessels in your heart. So I think for a lot of people, it's really intuitive that air pollution impacts your lungs because you're breathing it in, but it also impacts your heart as well. And there's more and more evidence coming out that it can impact your brain health too, especially the really, really small particles. So when you just Google, like, what's my air quality? Or maybe you've seen, if you look on the weather app, at least on the iPhone anyway, a lot of times they'll have the air quality listed there. So most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, that number that you're looking at for air quality is referring to, it's referring to the amount of PM 2.5 in the air. Sometimes other pollutants, but usually PM 2.5. So this is from, on the left side, this is from airnow.gov, which is a really good resource to look up your local air quality. And it's showing, this is a screenshot from today. So it's showing good air quality, and it's telling you which pollutant it's talking about. So it's talking about PM 2.5 here. So during wildfire smoke, usually the messaging that you hear is to just stay inside. So one of my big questions is it enough to just tell people to stay inside? Is that going to give them enough protection from wildfire smoke? And, you know, usually what I've seen is that during wildfire smoke, indoor levels of PM 2.5 are lower than they are outdoors, but they can still be kind of high. So it's definitely an important consideration. And PM 2.5 and other air pollutants that originate outdoors, including wildfire smoke, do get indoors. So this figure on the right is just showing some ways that they got indoors. They can come indoors through, you know, the ventilation system if it's drawing in outdoor air. They can come in through natural ventilation, which is just opening windows and doors. They can come in through building cracks and around windows and things like that. And then I really like that this figure has on here indoor particles, because that's another really important thing, as you can tell people to stay indoors with their windows and doors closed. But there are a lot of indoor PM 2.5 particles that come from indoor activities. And so those can also have a really big impact on your indoor air quality. So this is just kind of re-emphasizing that point that your indoor air quality is impacted from outdoor air pollution that comes inside, but also from air pollution that's generated outdoors or generated indoors, sorry. So those include things like cooking. Cooking can cause huge spikes in your indoor air pollution, smoking, any kind of burning, including, you know, candles, incense, fireplace, wood stoves, things like that. And then cleaning is also one that I think is not intuitive to a lot of people, because you think you're cleaning and you're making your indoor environment cleaner, right? But a lot of times, especially if you're using kind of harsh cleaning chemicals, that can contribute to bad indoor air quality. And even something like vacuuming without a HEPA filter. You know, when you're vacuuming, you're pulling air in through the vacuum, and the filter is picking up the large particles and the big, you know, pieces of things on the floor. But then all that air is just being blown out the other side of the vacuum cleaner, and it includes a lot of small particles. So now you've taken particles that were on the floor and put them into the air. But if you have a HEPA cleaner on your, or HEPA filter on your vacuum cleaner, then it'll trap all of those really small particles and help reduce that. Anyway, that has nothing to do with wildfire smoke, except for that, just to keep in mind that you may be going inside and protecting yourself somewhat from this outdoor air pollution, but you still have to be really mindful of the air pollution that's created indoors. A couple other really important considerations for wildfire smoke preparedness are heat and COVID. So if you have more ventilation, more outdoor air coming in, you're going to, this is, you know, especially for people who don't have air conditioning or facilities without air conditioning, you're going to reduce heat, and that's really important. And you're also going to reduce potential COVID exposure. But if you close everything up and have less ventilation, you're going to reduce the amount of outdoor air pollution that gets inside. So it's really hard because, guidance around heat and COVID is can conflict with guidance around wildfire smoke. And it's really challenging, and I'm not, I don't have a right answer for you, but it's just, really important things to keep in mind. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit now and just talk a little bit more about PM 2.5 monitoring, because usually it's PM 2.5 monitoring that's used to quantify and communicate wildfire smoke risks. And usually agencies will use this thing called the air quality index to quantify and communicate that risk. So if you have ever looked up your air quality information, you've probably seen this kind of color scheme. So it goes from, green is good air quality all the way up to maroon, which is hazardous air quality. And each category has these different values of the air quality index. So this is probably the number that you'd be most likely to see if you just looked up your current air quality would be an air quality index value. And those values come from the actual amount of pollution in the air. And usually the pollutant that they're looking at during wildfire smoke is PM 2.5. Sometimes it's PM 10, but most of the time it's going to be PM 2.5. So let's say you saw that you had a value of 25, AQI value of 25. That's probably corresponding to a PM 2.5 concentration of around 6. And these units for PM 2.5 are micrograms per meter cubed. So it's an amount of the particulate matter per volume of air, per meter cubed of air. And then each category has kind of a health message. So the ranges from good, where air quality is satisfactory, all the way up to hazardous, where it's a health emergency. And if you have any more questions about this or what nowcast means, I'm happy to talk more about that at the end. So this is a really great resource to use to look up your local air quality, honestly, anytime, but especially during wildfire smoke. And I put the URL here at the bottom, and this is the EPA's fire and smoke map. And if you click on the menu icon, which is next to the FAQs, it'll pull up all of these options for things to look at. And this is a screenshot from today. So it's, it's mostly good air quality in the Pacific Northwest today. But this is showing in circles, those are permanent monitors, which are usually regulatory agency monitors that are managed by EPA or the state or tribes. And then there are these temporary monitors, and those are, sorry, I should have said those are, accurate, reliable monitors. And then there are these temporary monitors, which are also pretty accurate and reliable, but are sometimes less accurate than the permanent monitors. And then EPA has incorporated into this map these low-cost sensors. So these are low-cost. What does low-cost mean? It means like the sensors that are on this map right now, I believe, are just purple air monitors, and those cost around $250. But it's possible that there already are or will be soon other low-cost sensors, other brands of low-cost sensors included on this map. But that's $250, you know, that's considered low cost because we're thinking about it's in comparison to an agency monitor, which can cost like tens of thousands of dollars. So that's why it's considered low cost, $250, even though that still may not be affordable for a lot of folks. And if you click on any of these monitors, you will see more information, including the current conditions and the trend. So whether the air quality has been going up or down recently. And you can also look at the smoke plumes, and you can also look at where the fire incidents actually are. So this is a great tool. Another great tool are these state smoke blogs. So I'm based in Seattle, so I'm most familiar with the Washington smoke blog, but there are similar smoke blogs for Idaho and Oregon as well. And I really wanted to bring this up because I think a lot of people see this and they see that it's hosted on Blogspot. And so they aren't sure about the credibility of the source. And this is actually really excellent information, and it's compiled by state, county, federal agencies, and tribes as well. And I know it's on Blogspot, and so sometimes people are really thrown off by that, but I think it's one of the best resources out there. And I look at the blog, the Washington Smoke blog, regularly during wildfire smoke season. So I definitely recommend it. Oh, and I wanted to say too, each of these 3 smoke blogs already have that EPA fire and smoke map incorporated into the blog. So when you load these blogs, you'll already see the fire and smoke map right away, the same one that I was showing you on the previous slide. Okay, so all of that information that I was just going through about how to look up your air quality, that's all referring to outdoor air quality. But like I was saying at the beginning, we also care a lot about indoor air quality. And it's not necessarily a given that your indoor air quality is going to be good if you just go inside and close windows and doors. It's not necessarily true. And one thing that I found is that your indoor air quality can actually vary a lot, even within the same building. So it's really important to get indoor air quality measurements. So this is just the point of this picture is just to show you kind of the range of levels of PM 2.5 that I saw in 2 schools during wildfire smoke in September of 2020. So you can see for this, I was using an accurate monitor where I was collecting actual samples of the particulate matter in the air. So all that stuff was being collected on these little filters. And you can see here, this is a blank filter for quality control. So, you know, you can look at the actual numbers and see the differences, but you can also see the differences just by looking at the shades of brown here. So, you know, this gym, portable, cafeteria, classroom, and computer lab, those are all at the same school. And they're all in the same physical building, except for the portable is a separate building. And then these 2 preschool classes are in a different school, but these classrooms are in the same building. And these are pretty big differences. And just a reminder, like good air quality was 0 to 12 micrograms per meter cubed, and moderate, I think, goes up to 35. So these are pretty big. These are pretty high concentrations. And you can also see from this that, of course, you know, the outside concentrations were a lot higher than the indoors. So that's good that the indoor just being indoors would have provided some level of protection, but the amount of protection really varied throughout the building. So one way to take indoor air quality measurements is to use low-cost sensors. And I wasn't going to talk about any specific brand in this presentation, but if you have questions about specific sensors, I will do my best to answer them if I've used that. But in general, my take-home message about low-cost sensors is that they can be useful to assess trends. So they can be useful to tell you, is there pollution going up generally or down generally? And they can be useful to compare spaces to each other. So is the air pollution in one room worse than in another room? Is air pollution indoors worse than outdoors, or vice versa? But there are a lot of important considerations and limitations of low-cost sensors. So I'll just talk about a few here. One to think about if you're thinking about purchasing a low-cost sensor or using one, something to think about is how that data is going to be displayed. So sometimes you can connect a sensor to the internet, or they'll have some kind of cloud-based service where you can view your air quality information that way. Other times it'll just have a little screen, where you walk around with a handheld sensor or something, and it has a little screen and you're just reading the numbers off the screen in real time. Other times, you can download the data off of the sensor and look, you can create your own graphs and look at how the air pollution has changed over time. Another consideration is noise. Sometimes some of the sensors just make a little bit of noise, just from, their own motors. And sometimes I've seen sensors before where the default is to have an alarm on if it reaches a certain threshold, which maybe you don't want if you're putting it, in a classroom. And you have to go in and actually change the settings to turn the alarm off. Another thing to think about is, is it battery powered? Is it solar powered? Does it need to be plugged in, or can it just be put on a wall? Or can it sit on a table, or is it just a handheld sensor where you're just walking around with it? And then it's also important to try and find out more about how accurate and precise the sensor data is. So, is it following, if you compared it to a more accurate monitor, then, would the data go up and down as the more accurate one does, or does it kind of have a totally different trend? That would be a bad sign. And then some of them, do track really well with more accurate monitor data. They go up and down with the monitor data, but they're still really far off. So they're going up and down at the right times, but it's like the actual concentration that it's giving you is really far off. So sometimes they can track well, but still not be accurate. And in those cases, which is the case for a lot of sensors, that's why I think they can still be useful to look at trends and to compare spaces to each other, because the tracking is reliable. The way that the air pollution goes up and down is reliable, even if the actual concentration is not reliable. And I'm happy to talk about that more later too, if you're interested. So let's say now you have your low-cost sensor or multiple sensors, and you want to take some measurements to try and understand your indoor air quality better. These are some considerations to keep in mind. So when you're taking measurements, what you really care about is what people are being exposed to, what people are breathing in. So it's important to take the measurements during kind of regular use building conditions, because you want to capture what people are actually exposed to. So for example, maybe you told everybody to keep the windows and doors closed, but they're not, they're still opening windows and doors. It'd still be really useful to find out what the air quality is like, during that regular use condition folks opening windows and doors, because that's reflecting what they're actually breathing. Also want to pay attention to, the time. So for example, if you're interested in a school, you might want to take measurements during pickup and drop off, because the front door is going to be open a lot during those times. And you also want to take measurements during, the middle of the day that might represent the majority of the time that the school is in use. It's also important to keep in mind what activities are going on in the space. So, are people running around and kicking up a lot of dust, or is there, cleaning going on that's impacting the indoor air quality, or is there cooking going on? So you'll want to kind of capture the range of conditions. And then another big one is if there's a ventilation system that's programmed to kind of operate during the day and then ramp down at night, that can be really important to make sure you're taking the measurements during the time period that the HVAC system is running normally, because that's the condition that you want to capture. You're going to get really different results if you take the measurements, at night when the HVAC system is ramped down. And then lastly on this slide is just this icon here is just talking about how it's important to also pay attention to what is happening outdoors. So how is the air quality changing over time? So let's say it's really good air quality in the morning, and in the morning you take a measurement inside of a classroom, and then you come back a few hours later and the air quality is much worse outside, and you take measurements in a different classroom. You're probably gonna, your conclusion might be, oh, the second classroom is has worse air quality than the first classroom, but really, probably the bigger difference was just that you took the measurements at really different times, and the outdoor air quality was changing over that time. So it's important to just pay attention to how the air quality is changing outdoors too. So one way you can use sensors, even if they are not super accurate, is to look at the indoor-outdoor ratio and then apply it to an outdoor agency monitor. So for example, let's say you took an indoor measurement using a low-cost sensor, and you found that the PM2.5 concentration was 50 micrograms per meter cubed. And then you walked outside and you set up that monitor outside, and you found that the PM2.5 concentration was 100 micrograms per meter cubed. Then you might say, oh, okay, it's about half indoors as it is outdoors. And then you could go to the Fire and Smoke map or the Washington Smoke blog, or airnow.gov, and look up your local air quality from an agency monitor. And let's say that says 60 micrograms per meter cubed. So now you could guess that the indoor concentration is around 30. So this is really crude, and it's better if you have, more measurements, like I was just explaining on the previous slide. Maybe you could take a bunch of different measurements and average them. But this is just to get a general sense of what your indoor air quality is like during wildfire smoke, using, accessible low-cost sensors. Okay, so I also just wanted to go through, not only how to look up your air quality and how to think about measuring indoor air quality with low-cost sensors, but also what can you actually do to maintain cleaner indoor air. So step one is to check the air quality so that you know when to take these actions. Close the windows and doors. Turn off exhaust fans, because if it's a fan that exhausts to the outside, then while it's on, it's going to be drawing outdoor air into your home or facility. If you have this option, set your ventilation system on recirculate, so it's not bringing in any outdoor air. And this is also really useful in cars, to click the recirculate, select the recirculate setting in your car while you're driving. That can help reduce your exposure as well. And then portable air cleaners can be really helpful, or do-it-yourself DIY box fan filters, which I think a lot of people have heard about it this time. If you haven't, you can Google this, and a lot of resources will pop up. But this on the right side is just some examples of, or one example of a box fan filter. It's just a furnace filter attached to a box fan, and then you turn the fan on and it draws air through the filter. And then really important is to minimize indoor sources of PM 2.5 as well. So really paying attention to that. And then I know I mentioned this already, but just again, to keep in mind additional considerations for heat and COVID, because that will impact, how much you feel comfortable having windows and doors closed, especially if you don't have air conditioning. So I did want to quickly mention a little bit more about portable air cleaners, and I think the next speaker is going to be talking more about kind of building level strategy. So this is, obviously not a building level ventilation system strategy. It's just kind of an individual supplemental strategy. But when you're looking up portable air cleaners, some things you want to pay attention to are if it has a CADR number, which is the clean air delivery rate, which just gives you a sense of how much air that unit can filter, per a certain amount of time. You'll want to think about the size of the space where you're trying to filter air. So, if you got a small little desktop air cleaner and you're trying to use that to filter air in an entire room, that's going to be really challenging. Noise is a really important consideration. I've seen sometimes people have air cleaners, but then they don't use them because they're too noisy. So obviously it only helps if it's turned on. And if people aren't going to use it, then it's not going to help. Some of them have this auto mode, so they actually have a sensor that's part of the air cleaner. And so as the sensor detects higher concentrations of PM 2.5, it'll ramp up the fan speed and then, ramp it back down automatically. And that can be nice to have. A sleep setting is important to think about if you're going to be putting this in a bedroom, especially a feature of being able to turn off the display light. And then filter replacement costs. I think overall the costs of portable air cleaners are coming down, but I don't know if the filter replacement costs are coming down at the same rate. So that would be a good thing to look at. And then I did just want to mention, a lot of times when you look up air cleaners, they'll give you the clean air delivery rate for the highest setting, but they'll give you the noise for the lowest setting, which obviously makes the air cleaner look better, but it makes it really hard to figure out what the noise level is going to be for different settings that you would actually be wanting to use. And then the type of air cleaner is very important. So there's a few different types. There's HEPA air cleaners, there's ionizers, and then there's ozone generators. And please, no matter how persuasive advertisements about ozone generators are, please avoid ozone. It's a known respiratory irritant. One way, so there's two kinds of ways that you could be exposed to ozone. One is from something that's really just marketing itself as an ozone generator. And then also some of the ionizing air cleaners also produce a little bit of ozone as a byproduct. So one way to make sure that you're avoiding a harmful level of ozone is by making sure that your air cleaner is on this list. And I know this is kind of a long URL, but if you just Google CARB air cleaner, and CARB stands for California Air Resources Board. If you just Google that, this will probably be pretty high up on the results. And they have certified, I think, hundreds of air cleaners at this point. So you can just like search for your brand and your model and just make sure it's on that list. And if it's on that list, then the California Air Resources Board has determined that the amount of ozone that it produces is below a certain threshold. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. And I put my email address here, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. anytime. And I'm also happy to pass along, you know, more resources and links and things like that. Oh, and I'm just seeing now there's stuff in the chat.
Thank you, Orly. If you could put your email in the chat, that would be really helpful, as well as that last link you mentioned on that last slide in the chat. That would be great. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Any questions for Orly prior to moving to our next speaker? And feel free to turn on your camera and unmute yourself as well. You're welcome. Looks like we've got one question for you, Orly. Are bandanas really effective at all for protection?
Sorry, I just realized I was on mute. That's a really good question. I'm not, I don't know a lot about masks, but my understanding is that bandanas are not effective, but that N95 masks would be more effective, but it's really important to have them be fitted correctly to your face.
Another question, do you know how essential oil diffusers compare to candles in regards to air quality, how they compare? I have an oil diffuser as well, so I'm interested in this question.
I don't know, and I am also, you're not the first person to ask me that recently, so I feel like I should go and try and learn more about it, but I'm not sure. One thing about candles is when they're burning, you actually don't see a big PM2.5 spike. You really see the spike when you blow out the candle, and you have that, you know, we all know from having candles, like you blow out the candle and then you have this big cloud of smoke. When the candle is actually burning, I think it's more gases that are being produced rather than particles. And I don't know what the impact of those gases are on indoor air quality. And I also don't know how they compare to oil diffusers. So sorry, I can't answer that, but that's a really good question. Is air quality more of an issue when you are working? I feel like that would really depend on just what the air quality is like in those different places. So if, you know, if your air quality is worse at home, then that'd be more of an issue when you're sleeping. But let's say your air quality is exactly the same, then I think my sense would be it'd be more important while you're working, because while you are working, your respiratory rate is higher, and so you're breathing in more air over time compared to when you're sleeping. But I'm not sure if there are other considerations about, you know, sleep quality, things like that. Particle reduction from outdoors to indoors, mostly the result of ventilation system. Yes, ventilations, well, yeah, combination of the filtration and the activities indoors. So whether or not there's indoor sources of PM2.5, and then also whether people are keeping windows and doors closed.
I was asking if you can explain the difference between effectiveness between a HEPA and carbon filtration.
Yeah, so my understanding is that the carbon filtration is more for gases than particles. That charcoal filter that's in a lot of air cleaners. So that's, as far as I know, those are good, but I think it's unclear how effective they are at filtering out gases. That the HEPA filter is going to be for particles and not gases.
If someone has asthma and their kids have pollen allergies, what kind of levels are safe or comfortable? There's been, times when they've been in smoky towns where it seemed to, where they had seemed to be the only one bothered. So that is a good question. I have my niece has allergies, and I am curious on what levels are safe and comfortable for kids.
That's a really good question. You know, the air quality index categories that are based on those different concentrations of PM 2.5 are, those numbers come from, you know, health risk studies about air pollution, and then they kind of extrapolate out to figure out, you know, what level of PM 2.5 is going to be considered good versus moderate versus unhealthy for sensitive groups. But I think, you know, people can really vary in how sensitive they are. So I mean, I feel like my sense would be, you know, that if you've had experiences where you're the only one bothered, then, you know, probably more sensitive to, you would probably want to be in a place with lower levels of PM2.5. But yeah, there's no like single number I could give you, but I think it makes sense that, you know, people would vary a lot in how sensitive they are. So even if the air quality is considered good, like I can still see how some people would still be, you know, their health issues be exacerbated by that.
Thank you. We have a question from Anya. So I'll let you go ahead and see your hand up, Anya.
Thank you so much. Orly, thank you so much for this great presentation. And I'm here in my personal capacity on my personal time, but I do work with air quality. So I'm familiar with PM 2.5. I'm mostly on ambient air quality. And I work on other pollutants, but I wanted to follow up on the asthma question because it's something that I have personal experience with. And I think Ellery or Emerly, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but so I had the same question. And so when I started working on air quality, I got access to different air quality monitors and sensors, and I got some low-cost monitors. And that's what helped me to identify at which level I became sensitive. And it was at, you know, around 20, 25 micrograms per cubic liter instead of 35, where it's considered the standard. It's a 24-hour average for 35 standard. And so it really helped me to understand where I need to act and realize that my sensitivities are at that level. And, you know, same with pollen. And so I do recommend, if you want to know you know, if you don't feel comfortable just trusting how you feel, then do use the sensors because they would really inform. And then you can proof your house, you can proof your car, you can air proof, you know, things like that, and figure out at which level you want to use your mask or turn on extra air purification. That's all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Anya. That's super helpful. Appreciate that. Awesome. Any other questions for Orly before we move on? John.
Hey, Anna, question, what sensors are you using to be able to tell? What do you recommend that we try? Because I assume we're all very individualistic as to where we become sensitive to air pollution problems, and maybe even individualistic depending on the day and how we're feeling and other factors.
Right. So because I did my project several years ago, sensors really evolved. And what I'm seeing right now, there's a lot more, you know, cost-effective sensors within $200 price range. I got mine, was more expensive. I can look up, I can't recall, it was 5 or 6 years ago. And I do think that there's a lot more. California agency did lots of investigation, EPA did lots of investigation on low-cost sensors. So they now actually have lists that they think are, you know, better ones, or the ones that correlate with the official monitors, as Orly said, the ones that are used for regulatory purposes. I can put a couple things like in the very high range, very trustworthy. So you can see how much those cost and then go from there if that helps. But I can't really recommend one or the other because, as Orly said, it depends what activities you're involved, right? If you want a wearable device, if you want stationary, if you want to monitor for gases, not just PM 2.5, you would have to get VOCs, volatile organic compounds. And with COVID, it's somebody on Twitter posted like an excellent list of things for air monitors that they use during COVID times, which, I mean, not for viruses, obviously, but, so there is lots of developments past 2 years. That's what I'm trying to get to. So I can't really get off the top of my head, but I could maybe with Orly's help to get a list to people.
Great. Can I ask one more question? I'd like to ask Orly or Anna or anyone else, how does, so many of us have had COVID at this point, and COVID has some lasting effect for some people in their lungs for a short term or a longer term. How does that affect those people's tolerance for wildfire smoke and type of problems like that?
I'm not sure. I have seen some, I have read some things that suggest that that having COVID, can make you more sensitive to wildfire smoke. I know that the Department of Health has written about that. Let me pull that up and I can put a link in the chat.
Thank you.
Jump in and I'll just, again, I'm sorry, I'm really into this personal experiences, but I had my pneumonia back in like 2013. It was, significant pneumonia. And that's where I started really paying attention to indoor air quality, because that's where my lungs stopped. I couldn't drive, for example, without air purifier in the car or mask, or I couldn't be in the traffic because I started experiencing symptoms. It got better, it improved. My lungs are much more resistant to pollutants and processing them. But yes, definitely viral or bacterial or, fungal infections on your lungs, it undermines their ability to clear. And we know from air quality studies that PM 2.5, that bacteria, that microorganisms adapt to bad pollution faster than we do. And so when you have better pollution, your body, the microorganisms tend to act faster and be more virulent. So there's research coming from UK a few years back. And so they use this to, in general, I think understanding that it applies to COVID as well, that yes, after COVID, in my personal experience, from what I experienced with early significant pneumonia, then yes, you want to protect your lungs more. You want to be more protective from exposures.
Thank you, Anya, for that. It's very helpful. Awesome. And thank you so much, Orly, for that great presentation. Love it when we can get other folks' input as well, and appreciate that information. Awesome. Well, Orly, will you be around for the duration of the rest of the event? If anyone else has any other lingering questions at the end?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, great. We'll move on then to Albert. I want to welcome Albert Brooks again. Thank you so much, Albert, for joining us. I will go ahead and give you the floor. I think you're able to share your screen. Let me know if you have any issues with that. And yeah, I'll let you kind of take it away. I unfortunately can't hear you. I do believe you are on mute. I apologize.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, no problem.
So yeah, I'm glad you're staying around, because I have to say, I'll do a screen share here and pop up a slide and so forth. So we're going to continue talking about, you know, wood smoke and IAQ in general, kind of maybe more at the building level and so forth. And I have to say, you know, since 2017, 2016, I've been really looking at wood smoke and a lot of the IAQ question a lot deeper than I had been before. And frankly, I still find it quite a challenging subject. I've really struggled to find definitive answers and definitive practices that really help. There's guidances. I think we have maybe some good strategies. Most things I've dealt with are you know, rather kind of rigid and 3-dimension, and you know, the building stands up or it falls down or it has insulation and we can see the heat loss. With air quality and wood smoke, you know, it's kind of this intersection between its particles, its gas, it's moving through an atmosphere, and then it's also how people are affected by it. And so for me, I've found a lot of wisdom, if it's even possible to call it wisdom, in just talking to people, understanding their sensitivity and trying to improve my understanding of it. I even find the filter literature on, you know, what a MERV 13 filter will filter particle size as opposed to a MERV 14 or a MERV 15 or a HEPA, and then trying to transpose what that means to someone's experience. So that's my disclaimer, and that's why I'm really kind of glad that Orly's around too, because I find it a challenging subject. I'll do the best I can and hopefully maybe bring something helpful. But when it comes to the human body and our experience, it's pretty tough. So like the picture in downtown Seattle, this one is Prince George, BC, by a friend, industry member in 2018 in August, same time period, at 9 o'clock in the morning, pitch black, really, really bad condition. And I think everybody across the Western US and Western Canada started really paying attention to this fact and kind of building in the assumption that these conditions are potentially with us kind of going forward. At that time, I was in Vancouver, BC, and we were actually trying out one of these air purifiers. So we harvested some numbers and checked some experiences. And so the outdoor air quality was really quite poor, very much like the numbers I put up there. The indoor air quality at this particular building, which was a very old, poorly constructed building, the indoor numbers were really not great. This particular machine was filtration, and it had an automatic function. And so we would see these kind of gusts of particles coming in. The numbers would kind of pop up. The unit would go into a higher fan speed and try to process more filtration and capture more. And eventually the numbers would slow down. A lot of that, you know, it's really hard to tell kind of how much of that is the fact that the wind is hitting one side of the building versus the other side, and one side has more leakage than the other side does. This building didn't have a ventilation system, but we experienced it. You know, my wife and I have had the headaches and eye irritation and all of these things. We really couldn't find a way other than this device to get any relief from it. And it's, you know, it's really kind of an ongoing problem. So not really telling anything new to anyone, but let's just take a step back. And when we look at continuous ventilation in buildings right now, kind of the newer buildings have some kind of, you know, well-performing ventilation device. We typically work with these Zender units, so that's kind of my experience, and that's what I can really talk about. And a standard unit comes with an onboard MERV 13 filter. And when we look up the literature of what what kind of particle size. It's 1 to 0.3, which is a good size. This is now code in California. I think this might be code or approaching code in Washington State for the commercial ventilation strategies. And so this is pretty good. Again, I am also interested in people's experience. So during this particular late summer, I got a chance to talk to a number of customers that have systems installed. All of them generally would have a MERV 13 on the supply filter coming into the building. And some of them just really did fine. They reported that their experience was fine. They safely made it through these large smoke events, while others said that the MERV 13 filter wasn't good enough at all. They had a lot of smoke coming in, and it really irritated and caused them some problems. Nobody seemed to report that they turned their system off, and that's why they did better than the others. They just had their filter in and they let it run at the normal rates. The advisement, in these conditions is to reduce the flow rates, especially based on the conditions that you can observe outside and anything that you can feel or experience inside. The newer buildings are going to have a better air barrier. So then we can kind of play with that question of reducing the airflow low enough, but keeping enough airflow moving so CO2 levels don't rise. And then we start, kind of experiencing, an abundance of CO2 and a lack of oxygen. But you can just kind of work that through. In any case, these filters were really not designed for wood smoke. So far in my experience, the wood smoke particles can become much finer than, the 2.5 microns. And I'm judging that by some experiences where I should be picking up much of this, maybe at the MERV 13 level. And in some of these cases, it just wasn't sufficient. And we'll look at that here a little bit later. And again, I'm not an expert on filtration. I still find the subject mystery. So I'm open to any suggestion or new information on this. So when my personal experience is I've had a lot of different filters to work with and systems to plug them in. And then I can look at data because I have the ability to look at some data using low-cost sensors. And then I can also just use my body to check my experience. And generally what I've found is the MERV 13 filters haven't really been enough for me and generally for most people. When I've put in a MERV 15 filter, which is much finer, and we've got an ash rate chart, I think, in the next slide, that's really helped. It was really great of Orly to kind of define that difference between a particle and a gas, because that black filter in the picture right behind is an activated carbon filter. And in one of the smoke events, it was really interesting. In 2018 in Washington, I think we had a week where we had some really fresh, new low smoke. And so the sun was darkened because of the particles and so forth, but also kind of hanging low in the atmosphere in our breathing level was really a lot of gas, or it sure seemed like it was a gas. And I did a small experiment by putting in an activated carbon filter in a building that we'll see in a couple of slides. And that really, really helped a lot. Then, strangely enough, 2 years later, another smoke event. This one, the fire's coming out of Oregon. They're much higher in the atmosphere. It's a lot less dense. It appears to be a much finer particle. And the activated carbon really didn't affect that. Putting in a MERV 15 filter did affect that. I'm struggling to say that I had two different events And I used 2 different filtration devices and got 2 different results. In both cases, I was satisfied with the results. But you know, what's a person to do if they all of a sudden have to have different filtration strategies around different events? Because the Corsi box fan, you know, going to Home Depot and getting a standard furnace filter is an activated carbon, so it's not going to stop the gases. Yet I think you can buy maybe some activated carbons at Home Depot to kind of make an adaptation of the Corsi box fan. So it might be just worth knowing that because at different times we're trying to filter out different particles or gases. So here's a MERV 13 filter efficiency guide, an ASHRAE guidance, and I find it a very imperfect document. It kind of gives us some room or some levels that the filtration is operating in. California code right now is MERV 13 on a supply intake. And so we see this kind of 12 to 14 range, and it has, you know, a pretty good arrestance level. It talks about the type of filter it is and really kind of what it's capturing, and then heading down to 14 and 15 approaches HEPA. It suggests HEPA. It looks like some pretty small particles and you know, maybe almost the gas at that level. As we head into 16, smokes and bacterias are kind of more gaseous than particles. So I guess, you know, the thing that I take away from this is, depending on the sensitivity and what we think the future is like, a finer filtration is better. And in some cases, MERV 13 is just a heck of a lot better than anything else. Another experience I had, we did a retrofit on this house here. We put in a ventilation system. So it's a continuous fresh air ventilation system. I'd say the continuous flow to this house, which is about 1,100 square feet over 2 floors, is about 70 cubic feet per minute. So steady. Ventilation rate, yeah, there it is down there, 0.32 air changes an hour. So that's a pretty steady rate, good values there. The thing that happened with this house is it's in a collection of older homes in Olympia, and some of these really old homes had very old wood burning stoves. So winter would come, people get excited about burning their wood stoves around, you know, October, November, December. It seems like there's a lot of burning. We get an inversion, and all that wood smoke is kind of hanging out low to the ground. And here we have this device that's pulling in air and running it through heat recovery with mild MERV 13 filtration. And this wood smoke is really nasty, and it's got a lot of gas in it. So MERV 13 didn't really do anything for the gas as near as I could tell. So we actually had to retrofit it and kind of take that right-hand arrow apart, which is the supply flow, pick it up, turn it around, reduct it, and add that steel box now on the right-hand side of the picture. And that steel box with kind of the 2 screws in the upper corners of that steel box at the lower, where the tubes are connecting, is actually a door. You open that door and you can slide in a activated carbon filter or a MERV 14 filter. Slid in an activated carbon filter and then ran the device at normal ventilation rates. The smoke cleared, the inside felt great. This particular structure has a really good air barrier. We retrofitted it down to 1.5 air changes. So there's really no other source of air coming into that building other than the ventilation device. And the filtration in this case worked well. However, you know, when we're working with activated carbon, the smell goes away and a lot of the irritation goes away. If there's any fine particles in there, I don't know that the activated carbon is really equipped to filter out those fine particles. So I can't really attest to how well I'm taking the particles out, but the irritation does go away. This building here is one of our warehouses in Tumwater, Washington. And again, I think this was 2018 also, and then also a little bit in our big blast of 2020. So from a building standpoint, what do you do when the outside air gets so bad and you're in a building that really doesn't have that great of an air barrier? It's got roll-up doors, so a little bit of wind hits it and it'll push anything inside. And we found a solution for this. So during that week when things got pretty bad, and I guess it must have been 2018 because it was low dark smoke in the atmosphere, we had a ventilation system in it, and then we quickly added kind of in that lower or the lower right-hand pages there, a filter box on the supply flow with an activated carbon filter. And while we didn't have any data monitoring at this point, we had a number of one employee absolutely had to go home by noon or 1 o'clock the day prior to us putting this equipment in. They got irritated. Their eyes were hurting. They had a headache, and I could agree with them. I wasn't quite hit as badly, but I could feel it. But you know, everybody has a different level of sensitivity. So the numbers, how this worked was the building's 5,600 square feet. It's got roughly a 20 foot ceiling or something like that. So it's 112,000 cubic feet. The ventilation rate of the equipment is 300 CFM. So that would be 18,000 cubic feet per hour divided by the volume. It would take roughly 6.22 hours to turn over the air volume in the building, which is, you know, kind of 0.16. So it's low, but at least it's effective. We can do something with it. And as long as we're not hit by high winds, then, you know, we shouldn't get too much additional, you know, kind of particulate coming in from the outside. So, you know, kind of what I can say is the day that I put this in, it was really uncomfortable, and I was getting a headache and my eyes were irritated, and I thought we'd, you know, have to close and send everyone home. But by the time we got that up and running, literally within 3 hours, which is only a half an air change or half the building exchange, the air quality improved, the sensitivity went away, and people were able to get on with their work and not feel any adverse effects. So I guess, yeah, I'm reading my notes down there. It said in 2 hours. Sounds about right. I kind of generally kind of work on the conservative side. So that was the experience. And I thought it was I thought it was valuable. It crossed a number of people, so it felt right to me. We've got a multifamily building up in Vancouver with 80 living units in it. And we've been kind of tracking the filter quality. So right before the big smoke event, we happened to replace all the filters in the building in early August. And the smoke really hit kind of, you know, mid to late August. And so we did an inspection after that. So we were scheduled to replace the filters. You can see the condition of the filter on the left. These filters are really there for our own health, but they're also there for the equipment because the heat exchanger core wants to remain clean. So the filter also kind of, you know, keeps that clean and functional. The schedule on this building is to change the filters once every, you know, 3 to 4 months. And you can see what these filters are picking up from the outdoor air supply. And then September 12th, you know, 40 days later, we look at it, that filter doesn't look too bad. Doesn't photograph that well, but that filter, it's got a little bit of a dark hue to it when you look at it straight on. And really, I think in this smoke event, it's not like we're picking up these big filters, big particles on the left. The particles that we're capturing in some of this filtration are really, really small, and they don't tend to build up in the same way. So it's a bit challenging to understand how well this is doing, other than getting some actual data or reports from average users. So in this time period, I really kind of came away with feeling like in new building projects, we ought to have the ability, we ought to put the ability to have filtration in, whether it's activated carbon or a MERV 15, something higher than a MERV 13 filter, because you never know which occupant is going to be affected by the filtration level at a MERV 13. It's clearly some are. So, there we go. Additional strategies to work with existing buildings. The picture on the left is a product that we have from Airwash. It's a HEPA filter. It's really designed to go into a ducted forced air system. And so it's a little box. It's got a 7-inch port and a 6-inch port, something like that. And so you can integrate that little box in with a forced air system, and you can just circulate the air across the house, bring it across the HEPA filter. It's got its own air handler inside, fan motor inside. So you can set it up to operate, and you can also, because HEPA's generally got a higher static pressure as a filter than like a MERV 15 or a 14 or something like that. So you need a pretty big medium if you're going to run it through a ventilation device that's really designed for a particular flow pattern and a particular flow volume. So the adaptation can be, take this device, put it into a forced air system, in which case you'd need the air handler in order to move the quantity of air that would be accustomed to moving through the system. And if it's integrated in with a Zender system, our recommendation is that you don't activate the air handler, you just use it as a passive device. The filter medium is large enough that it doesn't really increase static to the point where it's not valuable or doesn't use. And it can be a little, it can be added after the fact. So on the right-hand side is that steel box with the filter casing that allows you to put a number of filters in. A discussion would be also where the filtration is placed, and the fine particle filtration really doesn't belong at the outdoor air source. A lot of people think about that. You could put it there, but if you're in a situation where you place it on the outdoor air source, especially if you're using a device that has a MERV 13 filter in it already, then essentially that outdoor, the fine particle filter is going to pick up all the kind of the dust and the garbage and become overwhelmed before the MERV 13 filter is. So by placing it on the fresh air flow on the interior side, then the MERV 13 filter on the supply air at the outdoor air source picks up all the big stuff, if you will, and then it goes through the heat exchange, and then it comes out as fresh air heading to the house. Then you integrate the fine particle filter, and its only responsibility is to capture the very fine particles, which is something it's really equipped to do. And that also takes you away from any condensation risk due to the fact that, when it's below freezing outside, now that filter, if it's in a steel box, is going to start, kind of trapping water, and we've got, kind of other issues to kind of deal with too. All those issues go away when it's on the warm side of the unit. So some strategies there. And now we're going to talk about something else, which is new and different and really interesting. So I'm just going to check on time, so you'd be doing okay. I see one thing in the chat. Okay, Jan, there you are. Good for capturing gases. Yeah, I think we're probably in agreement with that. Great. Okay. So I'll kind of get that back. I want to go back to that, my earlier slide. Please let me go back. No, I don't want to go forward. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so here's a new unit. It's coming in September. It's a really interesting device, and 3 slides, and then we're going to actually jump to a web page because the unit comes with a bunch of data, which is really useful. So I can kind of match that up with our experience. So when we look at buildings right now, new construction, if they want to put in a fully ducted ventilation system, then that's great, and there's a budget and a design and a demand for that. But what do we do with all our existing buildings? And we found this unit in near Amsterdam. It's made in Holland. It won a Passive House Institute Germany component award also in 2018. And it's really a really interesting unit. And I'm bringing it back. We're introducing it, running it through its UL, and making a couple of adaptations to it. I'm pretty excited about it because retrofits are really, really tough. And this thing does a really good job at some key points if people find these key points useful. Key point number 1 is, you can see on the left-hand side, it's just 2 holes through the wall. We've got some other devices that can be really challenging to get those through the outer building envelope in terms of its thickness and size and room placement and things. So 2 5-inch holes through the wall, and we're there. And I'll stay on this slide for a moment. And the power supply is 110 volts. So if there's a nearby 110 volt receptacle, it can plug in. I'll jump ahead a slide because I think I'm going to do okay at this. I'll jump back. Sorry for this. I've not shown this before, and my knowledge on this is imperfect, but I'm getting there. So on the right-hand side of the picture, you can see there's a filter down there at the bottom. So it comes standard with a MERV 13 filter, and that's what we're looking at. But it also has the option of a MERV 14 and a MERV 15 filter, which is a really exciting filtration level. And the other interesting thing about this product is that it's demand driven. So demand driven means that it's going to look at a number of factors inside the living space, to VOCs, through PM 2.5 and PM1, and humidity, and make some decisions on how fast it should run its flow rate. Just starting with CO2 as a proxy for occupancy, if it sees low CO2, it's going to run at a low fan rate. As CO2 climbs, fan rate's going to increase, and it's going to start managing the fan rate. I think I'll be able to show you some operational data here in a couple of slides to show how that works. So this is a retrofit, so that big box kind of does hang off the wall. There is a flush mount model where that box can flush out in the wall, and it's still 2 5-inch holes, 110 volt plug. New construction is flushed in the wall, so it can be fairly seamless. Or 14 filter upgrade. The data package is what we're going to look at here pretty soon, which is, it's a new world. Right now, the filter medium is large for the flow, so the schedule to change the filters is annually, which in multifamily buildings is a big deal because the building manager's got to go into an occupied unit or something like that, and that can be a challenge. So if that reduces from 3 times a year to once a year, that's a big win. There is a return ducting strategy possible, which means this can also replace a bath fan, because we can collect bath and kitchen exhaust, bring it back, and it can look at the humidity and decide whether it needs to go into boost or not. These are just side, because we're really talking about smoke and so forth today. And then supply ventilation, creating cascade ventilation strategies is possible with a forward unit, which I'll show a little picture. And it's timely because we actually have a full workshop on this tomorrow. And if anybody's interested, I could probably put a link in the chat, and you could, kind of go deep and learn more about this one. So the forward in the cascading supply ventilation is, what if you had an existing building and you wanted to take the bath fans out, and you could run some ducting to the back from the bath fans all the way back to the unit. But then you had a 1-bedroom apartment and you wanted to get fresh air supply flow into that 1 bedroom. This is a unit that would go in the wall that's totally self-supporting, that looks at CO2 levels in the bedroom, and rather than supplying into the bedroom, it pulls air out of the bedroom. So if we have one of the standard wall units placed in a living room or a central room supplying fresh air, and it knows the quality of the fresh air, and this is depressurizing a bedroom, then essentially what the fresh air supply is going to go through the door undercut of the bedroom as the bedroom depressurizes through this unit. And this unit will actually look at the CO2 that it's pulling out. As there's more CO2, because people are in there sleeping, it'll run faster, and that'll cause more fresh air to come inside. And if there's more CO2 exhausting into the living room, then the unit in the living room is going to see that, and it'll increase its fan speed. So they kind of work together, still learning a little bit about them. But with that, I think I'm going to stop sharing that screen, and I'm going to attempt to share another screen that I hope is kind of set up and ready to go. There it is. Look at that. Okay, we successfully made it to a web page. So, so in this particular strategy, this FreshR has an onboard LTE stick. So that means it's got a whole bunch of sensors in it, and it's got a communication module. And so it's outputting data up to the cloud, and we're looking at it on our cloud interface. If you're a single family home, this could be everything you're looking at. If you're a multifamily building, you could be looking at 50, 60, or 70 of these, all named for different living units and all with different level of access to gather different level of data, user level and then building manager level, who, maybe can control more about the thing. But let's just look at this. So right now it's just, we're going to say 512, this is CO2, ppm, 62% humidity. This is a live unit somewhere in Europe. I don't know where. So we're actually kind of spying on somebody right now, but we don't know who we're spying on. So I'm going to take it that that's okay. It's today. There's a little time lag. And so right now we're looking at oxygen, and we can bounce back. I looked at a couple of earlier days. It didn't really seem like there was a lot going on here. So this might be a little unoccupied. I'm sorry about that, but I saw a little bit of activity today. And I can jump and see another one. But essentially what we'd be looking for is on this color code. This is a 24-hour cycle here as we move around. Oh, and something happened right here. So CO2, as seen right here in this area, you can see it in my cursor. CO2 is expressed by this level of line right here. So CO2 popped up to 801 right there. And as we back down here, we can see that CO2 is relatively low. At the same time we're looking at that, we look at the flow rate in this graph right here in this color. So flow rate right now is 24 cubic meters per hour. And as the CO2 climbed, we'll see that the flow rate actually started climbing also. So it's essentially looking at what the CO2 is inside the living space and adjusting the flow based on the CO2. And it's got a certain sense of design goals that I'm still learning a little bit about, but it's going to try and manage CO2 with flow rate to be at 1,000 parts per million or maybe 1,100 parts per million and down. it's never going to say, oh, okay, I've got 1,000 parts per million and I'm going to go at 100% fan speed, because then we're also going to increase loss. And there might be some other things going on with humidity and particulates that say, well, let's just manage a number rather than just go on and off or 100% or lower. And at the same time, I wish there was something going on in this unit. Not that much is going on. It does the same thing in humidity. So this is actual live data. Humidity is the outer band, the light blue numbers. Water vapor is expressed right here. And in my training, ideal conditions are right around 12 grams per cubic meter of water vapor. And we seem to, their climate is very much like ours. We seem to spend a lot of time right around there. But also, if you consider that you've ducted the bath exhaust back to this unit, essentially what it's going to see is it's going to see the humidity pop up when someone showers. Then it can go into boost. We can do some special programming to say, okay, when we see this event happening and we go into boost, we can say, okay, go into boost until you see the humidity drop, but then stay in boost for another hour so we can dry out the shower stall and things like that. We'll go back and I won't really look at energy today because it's not really the subject today. But we can also look at aerosols, and we can look at them and they can get graphed in some very small numbers, right? PM 2.5, but also PM1. So something happened here because the building is sitting in the world somewhere. And so in this level right here, if we take supply flows right here, supply flows are post-filter, and we're seeing 0, which nobody's going to argue that 0 is a bad number. The outdoor air quality number is right here, if you can see that in my cursor. And 4, that's quite low. But over here, it bumped up to 18, which is still really low. I don't really become that active until it hits like 40 or 50. I can look for a couple of days, essentially. But what it's going to do is it's going to watch the fresh air coming in, what the particulate size is. It's going to adjust our flow. It's also going to just tell us what our indoor, what our supply is, but also it has a return port. So it's in a studio apartment and we're cooking in the studio, and we've cooked something and we've put some, kind of atomized some grease or something like that, or I've burnt a pizza or something which is probably sadly common. It's going to see that return flow. And so if this starts popping up, which is the other side of indoor air quality, when the source is inside, it's going to increase flow. It's going to increase flow and try to evacuate that out. So because it has onboard data, it can do a lot of interesting things. And evidently okay, here's something. So the air quality got up to a whopping 27 there late at night. And the indoor air quality got up to 24, but the fresh air filter, the fresh air supply is down to 5, which is not too bad. So, this is where I'm still learning. It's like bad outside and somebody's cooking inside at 11 o'clock at night. That could definitely happen. And the system's going to see, it's going to see that activity and it's going to try to do something about it. As we get farther into it, for those that are interested in data, there's lots of fun data available in water, energy, all of that. But really for aerosol and IAQ, these data points are really pretty interesting. And then on a building manager level, occupant or a building manager level, and especially, when some of the utilities or certain arms that are investing in school health or something like that, this is the data that they would find very interesting, accumulating over time. And essentially, we can set some date ranges, and it'll tell us how much time we spent in this 400 to 600 bucket or the 600 to 800 bucket. And we can look at that. We can look at buckets on indoor air quality. We can look at filter effectiveness. We can look at how it affected flow, and that's a very, very low flow. and get some really, really useful data. So this is a new unit, the Fresh Air that workshop tomorrow, and we'll be introducing it hopefully in September. We're just kind of working through the UL and getting it there. And now I'll just take a look at the how do you deal with the pressure difference between intake fan and the exhaust fan caused by the added filter accumulation? So in all cases, so Jan, if you, this is the way I'll say it, the best way I know how. It depends on the product and the application. If it's a Zender product, you can add a MERV 14 or a MERV 15 filter, an activated carbon filter, without changing any of the balancing. The pressure drops with filtration added are essentially inconsequential and won't move it outside of the 10% balancing range. And that's just a function of how much flow there is across the static pressure of the filter medium. So that's a simple answer. This unit is self-balancing. Newer Zender units are also self-balancing, the Q series. And if we're dealing with an air wash or something like that, it really takes somebody to measure it, right? So somebody's got to come out with a flow meter, look at the supply, look at the intake. You can do that on the outside of the building, and just try to do a little bit of rebalancing and make an assumption of whether we're going to balance with the filter in or out. If generally the filter is just remediation of smoke and discomfort, then we'll do that hopefully a small amount of time over a calendar year, in which case we balance for normal operation without a filter. And then at times when there's a filter, then we'll take a small energy penalty because the system will be slightly out of balance. Another little personal share is I'm living with a MERV 15 filter 24/7 just because I think I've reached that point. And the system will allow me to do it. This is really where I was trying to get to, is the next statement is we just set up a manufacturing shop in a 5,000 square foot building where we're building some heat pump water heater skids. And we've got a crew of workers in there. And we just set up their ventilation system, which is, one of these HRVs with a MERV 13 filter. And strangely enough, one of the workers comes up to me, and he usually has really bad allergies. And what he reported to me, which I didn't even ask, wasn't even part of the conversation. He just said, "Hey, really weird thing. When I'm here, my allergies go away. As soon as I leave the building, go outside and go home, my allergies come back. I'm just hit with it." And that's a MERV 15 filter. We did that simply because we're creating a really dusty environment. So we want to kind of keep it clean to just keep everybody's lung health in as good a shape as we can. But in doing that, we're just creating an environment that improves his just daily comfort in normal allergies. Next question from Anya. I'd love it if you could touch on energy. One of the issues in earlier energy efficient buildings was poor air quality. And it's one of those balancing units. Anya, I would love to talk about that. I talk about that a lot. I just have to say, I do have a dog in that race. So I learned about this building passive house buildings and working on those kinds of projects. I use Zender equipment. And so I'm in that funny position of working with buildings with really, really, really good air barriers, and also not experiencing an energy penalty because the equipment that we're using is essentially 90% recovery. And so we look at the energy models and we look at the post-occupancy data on the buildings, and these low load buildings just, they have a really, really small load. The load matches the model typically between, 3 to 5%, maybe 7% on sometimes. And so you get that triple bang. You get really good energy efficiency, low power input, and you get great health and great sense of well-being because your air quality is so good. And that's just kind of the space we live in. John Alexander, I was waiting for that question. As soon as Orly kind of started talking about those low cost sensors, I was kind of like, I guess I got to learn about sensors now. I can't say anything yet. I think I'm going to learn. And my aside was, in my home that I have right now with all these wonderful MERV 15 filters, I've got a Purple Air installed. And I've got a beta test of an equipment that never made it to market, but it's super cool and I wish it made it to market. But imagine a Zender HRV, if you will, and a Purple Air outside. And the Purple Air is actually communicating up to the cloud. And then there's a custom-made control box that's also communicating up to the cloud. And it's looking at what the Purple Air says is on the outdoors of the house. And it throws that into 4 different buckets. And when the buckets start getting bad, it says, hey, slow down fan speed because your occupant is away from home for the day. Fire breaks out and you're in California. And you want 2 things. If you don't, whatever you want, and especially if there's no occupancy, you want to lower the fan speed and reduce the amount of air coming in unless you need it, which you can override and bring it back up. And at some point, you just want to turn off the fans completely because, in some areas, there's burning embers floating in the air. And the last thing you want to do is bring those into a fan that's trying to pull, fresh air from the outside. So this particular device is functioning. It's doing that. It's also outputs another data set for our interior air quality. And I watch the interior. So now I've got a Purple Air outside, a Purple Air inside, and then this additional sensor on the inside. And I do notice that the 2 sensors, the 2 inside sensors don't agree. And I've got them parked right next to each other in the kitchen where I burn pizza and create bad indoor air and cause that number to go really high. And it works. So, kind of hopefully where we're heading is the low cost sensors can be used to guide equipment and tell it, maybe even, kind of in a dumb way, speed up or slow down, especially slow down. But if we're trying to, do research work, then that's not the equipment to do. Sorry, John, that was a long way of saying, I don't really know how good they are. And then your next question is, how does the Zender Q HRV capacity adapt to conditions compared to the Fresh-R? How does the Q capacity to adopt to conditions? Q will not adopt to particles. It doesn't look at it, has no way to measure it. The Fresh-R is the only thing that will look at CO2. A Q, you can add a CO2 sensor in it. They're 2 different animals. The Q is going to do ventilation and you can add filtration. It's really made to be running at a constant, continuous ventilation rate. And the Fresh-R is a uniquely different device. It is not as efficient in recovery as the Q. And so when you're not as efficient, the one way to control energy is to only use flow when you need flow, which is when there's occupancy. So the idea of ramping down occupancy on a Fresh-R makes sense. Ramping down occupancy on a Q maybe makes a small amount of sense, but they're so efficient that the fan savings aren't really that much. But the Fresh-R is trying to look at multiple things. It's trying to look at energy and do a good job with energy, but it's also really about managing IAQ. And then, so Debbie Cleary asked a big, long question. I'm gonna have a hard time reading in front of everybody because I'm a slow reader. Oh.
I can maybe help
Someone
with.
to go. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I can maybe help with Debbie's question. Debbie, we have, like I mentioned at the start of our presentation, a green building directory where we have many vendors listed. I can provide you that. I know Bellevue has an East Side vendors working group as well that has a directory, as well as the Master Builders Association Find a Pro link, all of which I will post in the chat for you. Those are just directories that we can recommend, but I'm not aware of any specific HVAC consultants for your specific problem, but I'm sure with those directories, there might be someone to be able to help you.
Great. Okay. And then John's got another question. Some of the reports from passive houses under HRVs in 2018 talks about problems HRVs not tight enough to keep smoke out in bad smoke conditions. Oh, for sure. They were designed in a world that we didn't have these wildfires, and they're really not equipped to deal with that. I don't think the Q series has a much tighter filter gasket than the original CA filter. So there's the improvement. But this is where I kind of feel like these things are now dealing with situations that they were really never designed to deal with. And if things get too bad, they just probably should be turned off or set at an away mode. Sad to say that's the situation we're in. And then lastly, George, wish to remind everybody that a wildfire smoke is a symptom of climate change, the disease. Sheltering inside filters or band-aids are the symptom. Cure for the disease is not using fossil fuels. Before you spend money on ventilations, yeah, I would agree. I did both. The gas is gone and the ventilation is there, and yeah, totally agree, George. Not my expertise. I'm sure everybody's expert at that now. Great. Good. And the rest are really posts, helpful posts. So thank you. This is mostly what I had today. So at building level, if we are doing ventilation is getting smarter. And again, this fresh air that I'm introducing, we're working with a number of multifamily projects in both the US and in Canada. Low-income housing is an area where there's a number of stakeholders that are interested in improving living conditions, which means IAQ and health more than just energy consumption. And a lot of those buildings are existing buildings. So when we really think about kind of what's the next 5 years for us, kind of product, where do we want to go? It's with something that fits in existing buildings in a simple way, simple power connections. And if we can provide data that is helpful in understanding stakeholders and return on investment in terms of health and effectiveness, then this becomes really interesting. So there we go.
Thank you, Albert. Are there any other questions for Albert this evening, or Orly? She is still on the line as well.
This is Anya. Albert, thank you so much. This is why I'm coming here, because I want to learn all these new things, and it's been great. I also like to push further and boundaries, and I just wanted to kind of give a heads up. If you start hearing one of the things that's coming, because we're trying to understand air microbiome, indoor air microbiome. It's not just particulate, it's not just CO2, it's not just the air ventilation, but it's also what type of biologics are present. And same with gut health, right? There is this extra body of microorganisms that make our life possible. Apparently air quality can also differ, and we haven't even scratched the surface on what is a healthy air. What does healthy air mean in terms of, it's not just pure oxygen, it's, it's there are living organisms that make our lungs happy. So it just,
Yeah,
I know it's taking, it's pushing, but
yeah.
Yeah.
No, thanks for the comment. I agree. I mean, I would really like to be the expert on indoor air quality, but 4 years into this, and I just feel like there's so much I don't know. And I've looked at data and I just don't feel like I've got the whole story. So I appreciate what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm gonna turn my screen over if there's nothing else, because we've seen enough of this chart.
Wonderful. It looks like we just got one last question in from John, and John, feel free to elaborate. But in 2018, there was a past house owner who used a HEPA vac to pressurize a mechanical room during a major smoke event. Have you seen anyone trying this as well?
The idea, Albert, is HEPA vacs actually are super tight because they're designed and regulated by OSHA to do that. And so this was in a passive house, one of those podcasts or webinars that they had, somebody talking after the smoke event in California. And it seemed to work, their data, because they had the purple air inside and out, and it showed that it really drastically improved their air quality inside. Interesting hack.
And yeah, and I think I remember Jan. Thanks, Jan. Yeah, I think it was. And yeah, and then there was the next year for Stephen was to actually put some data in a filter box, and I think we did that. Yeah, okay. So yeah, fair enough. Totally makes sense to me. I think when we're in these conditions, we find new solutions. Because we need to. Fair enough.
I imagine a world where our weatherman says, well, we have a high chance of you needing a carbon filter today, and I suggest you switch up to your HEPA, your MERV 15 today, and keep watching your sensors and keep posted.
Yeah, and I think the last, hopefully we'll have another year where it just depends on where you are too and which way the wind's blowing, because the fires are certainly burning, and our experience is partly wind driven.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'm there. There's that button. Now it's back.
Thanks, Albert. That was really great. Awesome. Any more questions? Wonderful. Thanks everyone who participated in discussion and adding additional information, as well as asking some really great questions. We appreciate your time, both Albert and Orly. There will be a recording of this presentation made available starting next week. I will be emailing it out via Eventbrite, and you can download it. There'll be a shareable link. And just a reminder, if you do become a Northwest Eco Building Guild, you'll have access to all of our past event recordings, some fantastic workshops that cover everything around green building design and architecture. Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for your participation. I'd like to thank our sponsors again for your support in making this event happen this evening. And thank you so much to our speakers again for their time tonight. It was awesome. Learned several new things, both from your presentation, Orly and Albert. Thank you so much for that high level technical information. Wonderful. Well, with that, I wish you all a good night. I'll leave the I like to leave the event running just a couple more minutes, just in case anyone has any closing comments or questions. I'll be here if you have any questions regarding the Northwest Eco Building Guild. And thank you all again so much. I look forward to seeing you all in person in July for our Tiny Homes for Homeless presentation and warehouse tour. Thanks, everyone.